I remember the moment my life changed forever. It all began with the arrival of my stepsister, whom I'll call E. I was around 13 or 14 years old, an age when I was just beginning to navigate the complexities of growing up, trying to understand myself and the world around me. My parents had divorced years earlier, and my mother had remarried, bringing E into our lives. From the very beginning, she carried herself with an air of entitlement that I found difficult to comprehend. Suddenly my little sister, Ls, and I were forced to share our already cramped room in a small townhouse with her. What had once been a safe, familiar space, ours alone, was now invaded, and it didn't take long for conflicts to arise. The first real battle was over sleeping arrangements. For as long as I could remember, I had claimed the top bunk of the bunk bed in our shared room. It was more than just a sleeping space. It was my sanctuary, a small refuge where I could feel a sense of separation from the chaos of our home. But he insisted it should be hers. She was relentless, wearing me down with her demands. I tried to stand my ground, but in the end I was forced to surrender. With nowhere else to sleep, I was relegated to the basement, a cold, unwelcoming space that felt more like a punishment than a compromise. Each night, I lay on a flimsy cot, feeling unwanted and discarded. The basement was lonely, isolated, and filled with the eerie creaks and groans of an old house settling. Hated it. It was as if my feelings, my comfort, and my presence in the home had become secondary to hers. But things only escalated from there. He had a way of asserting dominance, a cruel and calculated approach that left me feeling powerless. One of the most traumatic incidents happened during a seemingly minor argument. It started with words, sharp and cutting, but suddenly she lunged at me. Before I could react, she had me in a chokehold. Panic took over. I struggled, gasping for air, my vision blurring at the edges. My body betrayed me in that moment of sheer terror, and I lost control. I wet myself. The shame was instant and overwhelming, shattering any sense of dignity I had. When I finally broke free, I ran to my mother, desperate for justice, for protection. But he faced little to no consequences. My mother, overwhelmed and unsure of how to handle the situation, brushed it aside. And I was left to stew in my humiliation and frustration, knowing that my suffering didn't matter as much as keeping the peace. Another defining moment came on my birthday. I had been looking forward to it for weeks, planning a sleepover with a few close friends, a rare chance to escape the tension at home and just enjoy being a kid. I wanted laughter, games, a break from the stress. But he had other plans. She took it upon herself to ruin the night. At some point during the party, she pulled out her phone and began showing my friends inappropriate content. I remember the way their faces changed, the confusion, the discomfort, the shock. The fun, light-hearted atmosphere was shattered. My birthday, a day that was supposed to be about me, had been hijacked by her selfish need for control. And then she took it even further. Later, she accused me of being the one who had shown the content to my friends. I was terrified. I knew how serious the accusation was. I saw the rage in my mother's eyes, felt the weight of her anger pressing down on me. For a brief, horrifying moment, E had succeeded in turning her against me. But justice, for once, found its way to me. My friends, still disturbed by what had happened, spoke up and told the truth. They confirmed that it was E, not me, who had shown them the content. My innocence was recognized, and she faced consequences for her actions. It should have felt like a victory. But the truth was, I was exhausted. The constant battles, the endless conflict, it was wearing me down. Then came the final, most devastating blow. E called Child Protective Services, CPS, on my mother, fabricating claims of abuse. It was a move so shocking, so cruel, that it left our entire family reeling. The investigation that followed lasted for what felt like an eternity, an endless cycle of social workers questioning us, scrutinizing our lives, looking for evidence of a crime that didn't exist. I lived in a constant state of fear, terrified that my family would be torn apart, that my mother would lose custody of us. In the end, CPS found no evidence of abuse. He was removed from our home and placed in a group home. The chaos she had brought into our lives had finally ended. But the scars remained. The damage she had inflicted on my sense of self, my trust in others, my ability to feel safe in my own home, was deep and long-lasting. Years passed, and eventually I heard news about E. She had dropped out of school. She had become pregnant, and tragically, she lost the baby. When I learned of her struggles, I felt a strange mix of emotions. On one hand, I couldn't ignore the sense of justice. It felt like life had finally caught up with her, that she was now facing the consequences of the pain she had inflicted on others. But on the other hand, I recognized her suffering. Despite everything, I couldn't find it in myself to wish harm upon her or her child. I knew what it was like to grow up in a toxic environment. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. Family dynamics remained complicated, especially when it came to my stepfather, SD. His sense of entitlement had always fueled the dysfunction in our blended family. He dismissed my feelings, my needs, making it abundantly clear that his daughter was his priority. His favoritism, his inability to see the harm she caused, made the conflict even worse. And when my mother eventually divorced him, the wounds left behind by their marriage only deepened. As I reflect on those years, I find myself grappling with my feelings about E. Her presence in my life was a storm, chaotic, destructive, and relentless. But I refused to let that storm define me. I have worked hard to build a life separate from those painful memories, a life where I prioritize my well-being, where I set boundaries that protect me from toxicity and dysfunction. It hasn't been easy. The scars are still there. But I have learned that I am more than the pain I endured. And most importantly, I am free.